Good evening. Welcome once again. You'll notice I, yet again, do not have a video game up. We're going to be continuing our journey into short horror stories for the month of October, Spook Month. This was well received on YouTube. The first one was, relative to me, I mean. I never am getting a ton of views, but this was my most popular video, this last one so far. So, in the interest of going with the flow, we'll be doing that again. Tonight, we're going to be reading The Immortal by Mary Shelley, a short story written in 1833. It tells the story of a man named Wincy. He drinks an elixir that makes him immortal. At first, this is a promise that's like eternal tranquility. He soon realizes that he is cursed to endure eternal psychological torture as everyone that he knows dies around him. For those who are not big Shelley heads, she's most famous for Frankenstein, of course, which she wrote as a teenager. Which is, not arguably, it is the first science fiction story out there. So a lot of people rightfully name her as the mother of science fiction, my favorite genre. So there's that. So good on you, Mary Shelley. She lived 54 years from 1797 to 1851, died of a brain tumor, but was very popular. I pulled up some fun facts because I didn't know these, and I thought it was interesting before we get into the story to read a little bit more about her. So, her mom was a feminist writer, wrote The Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1792. That was Mary Wollstonecraft. Died before she could really meet her daughter very much. She died of infection from childbirth for Mary, so didn't really get to know her mother very well, but her writings and everything were impactful on her daughter. She played host to quite a few notable people in her younger years, since she was the daughter of philosophers and writers. She had met the poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the former U.S. Vice President Aaron Burr, and Charles Dickens' grandfather Erasmus Darwin. This one's a fun one. It's believed that she lost her virginity on her mother's grave. So she was interested in the macabre at even a young age, having sex in a graveyard. Kick ass. Makes me feel like Return of the Living Dead. Very fun. Only one of her children survived her. So by the time she wrote Frankenstein at 18, she had already given birth once. That daughter died within weeks of birth. And that might have inspired the writings of Frankenstein, a creature that's come back from death. And then her two other children, William and Clara, died when they were toddlers. Percy Florence was the only one who survived into adulthood. That's unfortunate. It was a bad time, to be alive. I think back then, if you got sick, it was kind of a death sentence. Rumors of murder surrounded her marriage to Percy. That's fun. Yeah. Oh, okay. So Percy ran off with Mary and left behind a young child and wife Harriet, who was pregnant with their second child. Harriet Shelley was distressed by her husband's affair. In December 1816, her body was discovered in the Serpentine, a lake in London's Hyde Park. Ooh. Her death was ruled a suicide, and Mary and Percy were married less than a month later. She was kind of not yet cold, I think. Convenient timing. Convenient timing. Okay. Yeah, Frankenstein originated with a ghost story contest, so she entered a contest in the summer of 1816. After reading a book of spooky tales, the group, including Mary, Percy, Lord Byron, and physician John Polidori, in their travels to Geneva, decided to to host a ghost story competition, rather, host it. Okay. Polidori was inspired to write The Vampire, pre-Dracula vampire fiction. So that's cool. She had gothic friends. She was a gothic teenager with gothic friends. Yeah. Oh, her husband was credited for the writing of Frankenstein originally. Of course, because a woman author at the time was not likely to get much publication. Probably what her mom was so upset about, maybe. Her second most famous book, The Last Man, is explores philosophical themes under the guise of a sci-fi premise. It's a dystopian tale. The 21st century world is at the mercy of a mysterious plague, and humanity teeters on the brink of extinction. So here, yeah, mother of science fiction. Because Frankenstein, while it's a horror movie, horror, I would prescribe, in a lot of senses, can be a spin-off of sci-fi. I mean, the idea that a man uses science to bring a body back from the dead, like Reanimator. It's very science fiction. Okay. If you had any doubts that Mary Shelley was the original goth girl, her treatment of her late husband's remains will convince you. When her body was cremated, an organ that was believed to be by some to be his heart refused to burn, so she kept it as a keepsake. Wow. After her brain tumor death in 1851, the heart was discovered in her desk, wrapped in the pages of Percy Shelley's poem Adonais. There you go. So she kept her husband's heart after he died. Spooky. Spooky. Okay. Well, with all that, now that we know who Mary Shelley is and was... Oh, hold on, my mic's doing a weird thing. Give me a second. Apologies. I think we're doing better. Yes. Okay. Yeah, it seemed to be having like a little spat with me. Didn't like me very much. So, anyway, let's get to Immortal. July 16, 1833. This is a memorable anniversary for me. On it, I complete my 323rd year. The Wandering Jew? Certainly not. More than 18 centuries have passed over his head. In comparison with him, I'm a very young immortal. Am I then immortal? This is a question which I've asked myself, by day and night, for now 303 years, and yet cannot answer it. I detected a gray hair amidst my brown locks this very day, that surely signifies decay. Yet, it may have remained concealed there for 300 years, for some persons have become entirely white-headed before 20 years of age. I will tell my story, and my readers shall judge for me. I will tell my story, and so contrive to pass some few hours of a long eternity, which becomes so wearisome to me. Forever. Can it be to live forever? I have heard of enchantments in which the victims were plunged into a deep sleep to wake after 100 years as fresh as ever. I have heard of the 7 sleepers. Thus, to be immortal would not be so burdensome. But oh, the weight of never-ending time, the tedious passage of the still succeeding hours. How happy was the fabled Norajad, but to my task. All the world has heard of Cornelius Agrippa. His memory is as an immortal as his arts have made me. All the world has also heard of his scholar, who, unawares, raised the foul fiend during his master's absence and was destroyed by him. The report, true or false, of this accident was attended with many inconveniences to the renowned philosopher. All his scholars at once deserted him. His servants disappeared. He had no one near him to put coals on his ever-burning fires while he slept, or to attend to the changeful colors of his medicines while he studied. Experiment after experiment failed, because one pair of hands was insufficient to complete them. The dark spirits laughed at him for not being able to retain a single mortal in his service. I was then very young, very poor, and very much in love. I had been for about a year the pupil of Cornelius, though I was absent when this accident took place. On my return, my friend implored me not to return to the alchemist's abode. I trembled as I listened to the dire tale they told. I require no second warning. And when Cornelius came and offered me a purse of gold if I would remain under his roof, I felt as if Satan himself tempted me. My teeth chattered, my hair stood on end, and I ran as fast as my trembling knees would permit. My failing steps were directed whither for 2 years they had been every evening been attracted. A gently bubbling spring of pure living waters, beside which lingered a dark-haired girl whose beaming eyes were fixed on the path I was accustomed each night to tread. I cannot remember the hour when I did not love Bertha. We had been best neighbors and playmates from infancy. Her parents, like mine, were of humble life, yet respectable. Our attachment had been a source of pleasure to them. In an evil hour, a malignant fever carried off both her father and mother, and Bertha became an orphan. She would have found a home beneath my paternal roof, but unfortunately the old lady of the near castle, rich, childless, and solitary, declared her intention to adopt her. Henceforth, Bertha was clad in silk, inhabited a marble palace, and was looked on as being highly favored by fortune. But in her new situation among her new associates, Bertha remained true to the friend of her humble days. She often visited the cottage of my father, and when forbidden to go thither, she would stray towards the neighboring wood and meet me beside its shady fountain. She often declared that she owed no duty to her new protectress equal in sanctity to that which bound us. Yet still I was too poor to marry, and she grew weary of being tormented on my account. She had a haughty but impatient spirit, and grew angry at the obstacles that prevented our union. We met now after an absence, and she had been sorely best while I was away. She complained bitterly, and almost reproached me for being poor. I replied hastily, "I am honest if I am poor. Were I not, I might become soon rich." This exclamation produced 1,000 questions. I feared to shock her by owning the truth, but she drew it from me, and then, casting a look of disdain on me, she said, "You pretend to love, and you fear to face the devil for my sake." I protested that I only dreaded to offend her, while she dwelt on the magnitude of the reward that I should receive. Thus encouraged, shamed by her, led on by love and hope, laughing at my late fears, with quick steps and a light heart, I returned to accept the offers of the alchemist, and was instantly installed in my office. A year passed away. I became possessed of no insignificant sum of money. Custom had banished my fears, in spite of the most painful In spite of the most painful vigilance, I had never detected the trace of a cloven hoof, nor was the studious silence of our abode ever disturbed by demoniac howls. That's literally what it says, demoniac. I still continued my stolen interviews with with Bertha, and hope dawned on me. Hope, but not perfect joy, for Bertha fancied that love and security were enemies, and her pleasure was to divide them in my bosom. Though true of heart, she was somewhat of a coquette in manner, and I was jealous as a Turk. She slighted me in 1,000 ways, yet would never acknowledge herself to be in this wrong. She would drive me mad with anger, then force me to beg her pardon. Sometimes she fancied that I was not sufficiently submissive, and then she had some story of a rival favored by her protectress. She was surrounded by silk-clad youths that, rich and gay, what chance had the sad robbed scholar of Cornelius compared to these? Sounds like a real charmer. Gonna drink a beer now. On one occasion, the philosopher made such large demands upon my time that I was unable to meet her as I was wont. He was engaged in some mighty work, and I was forced to remain day and night, feeding his furnaces and watching his chemicals preparations. Bertha waited for me in vain at the fountain. Her haughty spirit fired at this neglect, and when at last I stole out during the few short minutes allotted to me for slumber, and hoped to be consoled by her, she received me with disdain, dismissed me in scorn, and vowed that any man should possess her hand rather than he who could not be in two places at once for her sake. She would be revenged, and truly she was. In my dingy retreat, I heard that she had been hunting, attended by Albert Hoffer. Albert Hoffer was favored by her protectress, and the three passed in cavalcade before my smoky window. Methought that they mentioned my name. It was followed by a laugh of derision, and her dark eyes glanced contemptuously toward my abode. Rude. Jealousy, with all its venom and all its misery, entered my breast. Now I shed a torrent of tears to think that I should never call her mine, and anon I imprecated 1,000 curses on her inconstancy. Yet still I must stir the fires of the alchemist, still intend on the changes of his unintelligible medicines. Cornelius had watched for 3 days and nights, nor closed his eyes. The progress of his alembics was slower than he expected. In spite of his anxiety, sleep weighed upon his eyelids. Again and again he threw off drowsiness with more than human energy. Again and again it stole away his senses. He eyed the crucibles wistfully. "Not ready yet," he murmured. "Will another night pass before the work is accomplished? Wenzi, you are vigilant. You are faithful. You have slept, my boy. You have slept last night. Look at this glass vessel. The liquid it contains is of a soft rose color. The moment it begins to change its hue, awaken me. Till then I must close my eyes. First, it will turn white, then emit golden flashes, but wait not till then. When the rose color fades, rouse me." I scarcely heard the last words muttered as they were in sleep. Even then he did not quite yield to nature. "Wenzi, my boy," he said again, "do not touch the vessel. Do not put it to your lips. It is a filter to curse love. You would not cease to love your Bertha. Beware to drink." Excuse me. As he slept, his venerable head sunk to his breast, and I scarce heard his regular breathing. For a few minutes I watched the vessel. The rosy hue of the liquid remained unchanged. Then my thoughts wandered. They visited the fountain and dwelt on 1,000 charming scenes, never to be renewed. Never. Serpents and adders were in my heart at the word never. Half formed itself on my lips. False girl. False and cruel. Never more would she smile on me. In that evening she smiled on Albert. Worthless, detested woman. I would not remain unrevenged. She would see Albert expire at my feet. She should die beneath my vengeance. She had smiled in disdain and triumph. She knew my wretchedness and her power. Yet what power had she? The power of exciting my hate, my utter scorn, all but indifference. Could I attain that? Could I regard her with careless eyes, transferring my rejected love to another, fairer and more true? That were indeed a victory. A bright flash darted before my eyes. I had forgotten the medicine of the adept. I gazed on it with wonder. Flashes of admirable beauty, more bright than those which the diamond emits when the sun's rays are on it, glanced from the surface of the liquid. An odor the most fragrant and grateful stole over my senses. The vessel seemed one globe of living radiance, lovely to the eye, and most inviting to the taste. The first thought, instinctively inspired by the grosser sense, was, I must drink. I raised the vessel to my lips. It will curse me of love, of torture. Already I had quaffed half of the most delicious liquor ever tasted by the palate of man. When the philosopher stirred, I started. I dropped the glass. The fluid flamed and glanced upon the floor, where I felt Cornelius's gripe at my throat. As he shrieked aloud, "Wretch, you have destroyed the labor of my life!" The philosopher was totally unaware that I had drunk any portion of his drug. His idea was, and I gave tacit assent to it, that I had raised the vessel from curiosity, and that, frightened at his brightness and the flashes of intense light it gave forth, I had let it fall. I never undeceived him. The fire of the medicine was quenched, the fragrance died away, and he grew calm, as a philosopher should under the heaviest trials, and dismissed me to rest. Stoicism, I see, is his practice. I will not attempt to describe the sleep of glory and bliss which bathed my soul in paradise during the remaining hours of that memorable night. Words would be faint and shallow types of my enjoyment, or of the gladness that possessed my bosom when I awoke. I trod air. My thoughts were in heaven, possessing my bosom when I woke. I trod air. My thoughts were in heaven. Earth appeared heaven, and my inheritance upon it was the one trance of delight. This is to be cured of love, I thought. I will see Bertha this day, and she will find her lover cold and regardless, too happy to be disdainful, yet how utterly indifferent to her. The hours danced away. The philosopher, secure that he had once succeeded, and believing that he might again, began to concoct the same medicine once more. He was shut up with his books and drugs, and I had a holiday. I dressed myself with care. I looked in an old but polished shield, which served me for a mirror. Methought my good looks had wonderfully improved. I hurried beyond the precincts of our town, joy in my soul, the beauty of heaven and earth around me. I turned my steps towards the castle. I would look into its lofty turrets with lightness of heart, for I was cured of love. My Bertha saw me afar off, and I came up the avenue. I knew not what sudden impulse animated her bosom, but at the sight she sprung with a light fawn-like bound down the marbled steps, and with hastening toward me. But I had been perceived by another person, the old high-born hag, who called herself her protectress and was her tyrant, had seen me also. She hobbled, panting, up the terrace. A page as ugly as herself held up her train, and fanned her as she hurried along, and stopped my fair girl with a, "How now, my bold mistress? Whither so fast? Back to your cage, hawks are abroad." Bertha clasped her hands. Her eyes were still bent on my approaching figure. I saw the contest, how I abhorred the old crone who checked the kind impulses of my Bertha's softening heart. Hitherto, respect for her rank had caused me to avoid the lady of the castle. Now I disdained such trivial considerations. I was cured of love, and lifted above all human fears. I hastened forwards, and soon reached the terrace. How lovely Bertha looked! Her eyes flashed fire, her cheeks glowed with impatience and anger. She was 1,000 times more graceful and charming than ever. I no longer loved, oh no, I adored, worshipped, idolized her. She had that morning been persecuted with more than usual vehemence to consent to an immediate marriage with my rival. She was reproached with the encouragement that she had shown him. She was threatened with being turned out of doors with disgrace and shame. Her proud spirit rose in arms at the threat, but when she remembered the scorn that she had heaped upon me, and how, perhaps, she had thus lost one whom she now regarded as her only friend, she wept with remorse and rage. At that moment I appeared. "Oh, Winzy," she exclaimed, "take me to your mother's cot. Swiftly let me leave the detested luxuries and wretchedness of this noble dwelling. Take me to poverty and happiness." I clasped her in my arms with transport. The old lady was speechless with fury, and broke forth into invective only when we were so far on our road to my natal cottage. My mother received the fair fugitive, escaped from a gilt cage to nature and liberty, with tenderness and joy. My father, who loved her, welcomed her heartily. It was a day of rejoicing which did not need the addition of the celestial potion of the alchemist to steep me in delight. Soon after this eventful day, I became the husband of Bertha. I ceased to be the scholar of Cornelius, but I continued his friend. I always felt grateful to him for having unawares procured me that delicious draught of a divine elixir which, instead of curing me of love, sad cure, solitary and joyless remedy for evils which seemed blessings to the memory, had inspired me with courage and resolution, thus winning for me an inestimable treasure of my Bertha. I often called to mind that period of trance-like inebriation with wonder. The drink of Cornelius had not fulfilled the task for which he affirmed it had been prepared, but its effects were more potent and blissful than words can express. They had faded by degrees, yet they lingered long, and painted life in hues of splendor. Bertha often wondered at my lightness of heart and unaccustomed gaiety, for before I had been rather serious or even sad in my disposition. She loved me for the better for my cheerful temper, and our days were winged by joy. 5 years afterwards, I was suddenly summoned to the bedside of the dying Cornelius. He had sent for me in haste, conjuring my instant presence. I found him stretched on his pallet, enfeebled even to death. All of life that yet remained animated his piercing eyes, and they were fixed on a glass vial, full of rosette liquid. "Behold," he said in a broken and inward voice, "the vanity of human wishes. A second time my hopes were about to be crowned. A second time they are destroyed. Look at that liquor. You may remember 5 years ago I had prepared the same. With the same success, then as now. My thirsting lips expected to taste the immortal elixir. You dashed it from me, and in my present, it is too late." He spoke with difficulty and fell back on his pillow. I could not help saying, "How, revered master, can a cure for love restore you to life?" A faint smile gleamed across his face as I listened earnestly to his scarcely intelligible answer. "A cure for love and for all things. The elixir of immortality. Ah, if now I might drink, I should live forever." As he spoke, a golden flash gleamed from the fluid. A well-remembered fragrance stole over the air. He raised himself, all weak as he was. Strength seemed miraculously to re-enter his frame. He stretched forth his hand. A loud explosion startled me. A ray of fire shot up from the elixir, and the glass vial which contained it was shriveled to atoms. I turned my eyes toward the philosopher. He had fallen back. His eyes were glassy, his features rigid. He was dead. But I lived, and was to live forever. So said the unfortunate alchemist, and for a few days I believed his words. I remembered the glorious drunkenness that had followed my stolen draught. I reflected on the change I had felt in my frame, in my soul. The bounding elasticity of the one, the buoyant lightness of the other. I surveyed myself in a mirror and could perceive no change to my features during the space of the 5 years which had elapsed. I remembered the radiant hues and grateful scent of that delicious beverage, worthy the gift it was capable of bestowing. I was then immortal. A few days after I laughed at my credulity, the old proverb that a prophet is least regarded in his own country was true with respect to me and my defunct master. I loved him as a man, I respected him as a sage, but I derided the notion that I could command the powers of darkness, and laughed at the superstitious fears with which he was regarded by the vulgar. He was a wise philosopher, but had no acquaintance with any spirits but those clad in flesh and blood. His science was simply human, and human science, I soon persuaded myself, could never conquer nature's laws so far as to imprison the soul forever within its carnal habitation. Cornelius had brewed a soul-refreshing drink, more inebriating than wine, sweeter and more fragrant than any fruit. It possessed probably strong medicinal powers, imparting gladness to the heart and vigor to the limbs, but if its effects would wear out, already they were diminishing in my frame. I was a lucky fellow to have quaffed health and joyous spirits, and perhaps long life at my master's hands, but my good fortune ended there. Longevity was far different from immortality. I continued to entertain this belief for many years. Sometimes a thought stole across me. Was the alchemist indeed deceived? But my habitual credence was that I should meet the fate of all the children of Adam at my appointed time, a little late, but still at a natural age. Yet it was certain that I retained a wonderfully youthful look. I was laughed at for my vanity in consulting the mirror so often, but I consulted it in vain. My brow was untrenched, my cheeks, my eyes, my whole person continued as untarnished in my 20th year. I was troubled. I looked at the faded beauty of Bertha. I seemed more like her son. By degrees, our neighbors began to make similar observations, and I found at last that I went by the name of the scholar Bewitched. Bertha herself grew uneasy. She became jealous and peevish, and at length she began to question me. We had no children. We were all in all to each other, and though, as she grew older, her vivacious spirit became a little allied to ill temper, and her beauty sadly diminished. I cherished her in my heart as the mistress I had idolized, the wife I had sought and won with such perfect love. At last our situation became intolerable. Bertha was 50, I 20 years of age. I had in very shame in some measure adopted the habits of a more advanced age. I no longer mingled in the dance among the young and gay, but my heart bounded along with them, while I restrained my feet, and a sorry figure I cut among the nesters of our village. But before the time I mention, things were altered. We were universally shunned. We were, at least I was, reported to have kept up an iniquitous acquaintance with some of my former master's supposed friends. Poor Bertha was pitied, but deserted. I was regarded with horror and detestation. What was to be done? We sat by our winter fire. Poverty had made itself felt, for none would buy the product of my farm, and often I had been forced to journey 20 miles to some place where I was not known, to dispose of our property. It was true we had saved something for an evil day. That day was come. We sat by our lone fireside, the old-hearted youth and his antiquated wife. Again, Bertha insisted on knowing the truth. She recapitulated all she had ever heard said about me, and added her own observations. She conjured me to cast off the spell. She described how much more comely gray hairs were than my chestnut locks. She descanted on the reverence and respect due to age, how preferable to the slight regard paid to mere children. Could I imagine that the despicable gifts of youth and good looks outweighed disgrace, hatred, and scorn? Nay, in the end I should be burnt as a dealer in the black art, while she, to whom I had not deigned to communicate any portion of my good fortune, might be stoned as my accomplice. At length she insinuated that I must share my secret with her, and bestow on her life benefits to those I myself enjoyed. Or she would denounce me, and then she burst into tears. It's doing that thing again. Give me just a second. It seems as if I touched the microphone cable, all bets are off. Thus beset, methought it was the best way to tell the truth. I revealed it as tenderly as I could, and spoke only of a very long life, not of immortality, which representation indeed coincided best with my own ideas. When I ended, I rose and said, "And now, my Bertha, will you denounce the lover of your youth? You will not, I know, but it is too hard, my poor wife, that you should suffer from my ill luck and accursed arts of Cornelius. I will leave you. You have wealth enough, and friends will return in my absence. I will go, young as I seem, and strong as I am. I can work and gain my bread among strangers, unsuspected and unknown. I loved you in youth. God is my witness that I would not desert you in age, but that your safety and happiness require it." I took my cap and moved towards the door. In a moment Bertha's arms were round my neck, and her lips were pressed to mine. "No, my husband, my Winsey," she said, "you shall not go alone. Take me with you. We will remove from this place, and, as you say, among strangers we shall be unsuspected and safe. I am not so very old as quite to shame you, my Winsey, and I dare say the charm will soon wear off, and with the blessing of God you will become more elderly-looking, as is fitting. You shall not leave me." I returned the good soul's embrace heartily. "I will not, my Bertha. But for your sake I had not thought of such a thing. I will be your true, faithful husband while you are spared to me, and do my duty by you to the last." The next day we prepared secretly for our emigration. We were obliged to make great pecuniary sacrifices. It could not be helped. We realized a sum sufficient, at least, to maintain us while Bertha lived, and without saying adieu to anyone, quitted our native country to take refuge in a remote part of western France. It was a cruel thing to transport tongue-tied. It was a cruel thing to transport poor Bertha from her native village and the friends of her youth to a new country, new language, new customs. The strange secret of my destiny rendered this removal immaterial to me, but I compassionated her deeply, and was glad to perceive that she found compensation for her misfortunes in a variety of little ridiculous circumstances. Away from all telltale chronicles, she sought to decrease the apparent disparity of our age by 1,000 feminine arts, rouge, youthful dress, and assumed juveniles of manner. I could not be angry. Did I not myself wear a mask? Why quarrel with hers because it was less successful? I grieved deeply when I remembered that this was my Bertha, whom I had loved so fondly and won with such transport, the dark-eyed, dark-haired girl, with smiles of enchanting archness, and a step like a fawn, this mincing, simpering, jealous old woman. I should have revered her gray locks and withered cheeks, but thus. It was my work, I knew, but I did not the less deplorable this type of human weakness. Her jealousy never slept. Her chief occupation was to discover that, in spite of my outward appearances, I was myself growing old. I verily believe that the poor soul loved me truly in her heart, but never had woman so tormenting a mode of displaying fondness. She would discern wrinkles in my face and decrepitude in my walk, while I bounded along in youthful vigor, the youngest looking of 20 youths. I never dared address another woman. On one occasion, fancying that the belle of the village regarded me with a favoring eye. She bought me a gray wig. Her constant discourse among her acquaintances was that though I looked so young, there was a ruin at work within my frame, and she affirmed that the worst symptoms about me was my apparent health. My youth was a disease, she said, and I ought at all times to prepare, if not for a sudden and awful death, at least to awake some morning white-headed and bowed down with all the marks of advanced years. I let her talk. I often joined in her conjectures. Her warnings chimed in with my never-ceasing speculations concerning my state, and I took an earnest thought, though painful, interest in listening to all that was though painful interest in listening to all that her quick wit and excited imagination could say on the subject. Why dwell on these minute circumstances? We lived on for many long years. Bertha became bedridden and paralytic. I nursed her as a mother might a child. She grew peevish, and still harped upon one string of how long I should survive her. It had ever been a source of consolation to me that I performed my duty scrupulously towards her. She had been mine in youth, she was mine in age, and at last, when I heaped the sod over her corpse, I wept to feel that I had lost all that really bound me to humanity. Since then, how many had been my cares and woes, how few and empty my enjoyments. I paused here in my history. I will pursue it no further. A sailor without rudder or compass, tossed on a stormy sea, a traveler lost on a wide-spreaded heath, without landmark or star to him. Such have I been, more lost, more hopeless than either. A nearing ship, a gleam from some far cot, may save them, but I have no beacon except the hope of death. Death, mysterious, ill-visaged friend of weak humanity, why alone of all mortals have you cast me from your sheltering fold? Oh, for the peace of the grave, the deep silence of the iron-bound tomb, that thought would cease to work in my brain, and my heart beat no more with emotions varied only by new forms of sadness. Am I immortal? I return to my first question. In the first place, it is not more probable that the beverage of the alchemist was fraught rather with longevity than eternal life? Such is my hope, and then to be remembered that I only drank half of the potion prepared by him. Was not the whole necessary to complete the charm? To have drained half the elixir of immortality is but to be half immortal. Forever is thus truncated and null. But again, who shall number the years of half of eternity? I often try to imagine by what rule the infinite may be divided. Sometimes I fancy age advancing upon me. One gray hair I have found. Fool! Do I lament? Yes, the fear of age and death often creeps coldly into my heart, and the more I live, the more I dread death, even while I abhor life. Such an enigma is man, born to perish when he wars, as I do, against the established laws of his nature. But for his anomaly of feeling surely I might die, the medicine of the alchemist would not be proof against fire, sword, and the strangling waters. I have gazed upon the blue depths of many a placid lake and the tumultuous rushing of many a mighty river, and have said, peace inhabits those waters. Yet I have turned my steps away to live yet another day. I have asked myself whether suicide would be a crime in one to whom thus only the portals of the other world could be opened. I have done all except presenting myself as a soldier or duelist, an object of destruction to not my fellow mortals, and therefore I have shrunk away. They are not my fellows. The inextinguishable power of life in my frame and their ephemeral existence place us wide as the poles asunder. I could not raise a hand against the meanest or the most powerful amongst them. Thus I have lived on for many a year alone and weary of myself, desirous of death, yet never dying, immortal. Neither ambition nor avarice can enter my mind, and the ardent love that gnaws at my heart, never to be returned, never to find an equal on which to expend lives there only to torment me. This day I conceived a design by which I may end all, without self-slaughter, without making another man a Cain. An expedition which mortal frame could never survive, even endued with the youth and strength that inhabits mine. Thus I shall put my immortality to the test, and for the rest of forever, or return the wonder and benefactor of the human species. Before I go, a miserable vanity has caused me to pen these pages. I would not die and leave no name behind. 3 centuries have passed me since I quaffed the fatal beverage, yet another year shall not elapse before, encountering gigantic dangers, warring with the powers of frost in their home, beset by famine, toil, and tempest, I yield this body, to tenacious a cage for a soul which thirsts for freedom, to the destructive elements of air and water, or if I survive, my name shall be recorded as one of the most famous among the sons of men, and my task achieved, I shall adopt more resolute means, and by scattering and annihilating the atoms that compose my frame, set at liberty the life imprisoned within, and so cruelly prevented from soaring from this dim earth to a sphere more congenial to its immortal essence. Neato. That's the story. So yeah, what do we think? Was he immortal? Was he just a long-lived individual? It reminds me of the character from The Sandman, who continues to live and doesn't despise it. It's truly an interesting specimen, because as most horror characters and characters from fiction and science fiction who find themselves immortal, they're often tormented and tortured by the fact that they cannot die. A funnier example is Groundhog Day. You know, he killed himself so many times in so many ways, only to wake up the next day, reliving the same day over and over again. Is that not a form of immortality? I think that's more of a torturous one, but yeah, immortal he is because he remembers and retains all the information that he's accrued day in and day out. Not to liken the works of Mary Shelley with Groundhog Day, but it's a good movie. And she is an excellent writer, or was, before a brain tumor took her. At 18, she wrote one of the most famous works of all time, an accomplishment that few can say that they were capable of. So, to you, Mary, cheers, and happy Halloween.